Hello, gentle listener, and welcome to Nocturnal Transmissions, the fortnightly podcast that brings you dark tales, both old and new, performed by your humble narrator, Kristin Holland. Oh dear, look at the clock. It's bedtime. Nocturnal Transmissions is proud to present Megan Joyce Pugh's The Brass Bed. I didn't mean to be abrupt. Roz looks awkward. She hates looking awkward. She changes tact. It's my fault. I've bitten off more than I can chew, or spit out, as my mother would say. Silently, Asakawa shows Roz through the hotel's huge creaking doors. Though rotten with woodworm, they're impressive. The name, Rycroft House, chiselled into the doors, splits in half, opening wide onto a green, worn, musty carpet. Asakawa nods politely, revealing a wispy bald patch in the middle of his dark hair. Roz notes that he looks a wreck, even more so than is usual for her endless list of clients who've lost everything they own. She squares her shoulders, ready for a long morning. Asakawa gestures Roz through first, then pauses at the entrance. Roz waits, impatiently, a moment. Mr. Asakawa, I'm sorry to press you, but there is another site I must get to before 12:30 p.m. Asakawa's head is bowed again. He looks small. Roz watches his dry fingers try to soothe his tight white knuckles. She wonders if he heard her. Mr. Asakawa? Slowly the hotelier lifts his head. He looks past Roz, eyes glassy, up the stairs. The sinews in his jaw tighten. Then he finally steps inside. The doors, with a heavy creak, click closed. The hazy summer outside disappears suddenly, plunging the hotel into another season. It came as no shock to the tourist community, not just the local one, when Asakawa's small empire began to go under. The rumour mill span with stories of an illicit affair, illegitimate children, payoffs, and drink. Some stories were laced with casual racism, though gossips would wave accusations away when challenged. Those who had stayed at the hotel didn't return, and those who hadn't dare not ever visit to find out if the stories were true. When Asakawa shakily begins his history of the place, she expects to smell alcohol on his horse breath, but doesn't. Asakawa continues, pointing out areas he's renovated, or saved, as he calls it. But it wasn't enough. Roz can't help herself and wonders what happened. He seems competent, has a passion and talent for renovation, plus he owns 2 successful hotels in other locations. Were the locals, with their prejudices and cliques, the problem? Asakawa rumbles on, detailing where some of the more famous guests had stayed. Roz doesn't need to know all this. Though she can't help but find it irritating, it's difficult for clients to say goodbye. She listens patiently, staring sometimes at Asakawa with calm unaffectedness. She tries to remind herself this is a catharsis Asakawa must go through. His voice is almost a whisper now. I feel guilty that even I couldn't save. He trails off. Roz smiles. It's with pursed lips, though. She thinks it's an odd thing to say. Even I. What's that supposed to mean? Asakawa and Roz move through the hotel. It's old and cold, like most buildings at the start of a life of neglect. But there's something else, something bleaker which leaks out of the hotel's walls and under Roz's skin. She shakes the feeling off. This is one of 6 jobs Roz needs to complete before the next quarter, and time isn't conceding. She tries running through a boring list in her mind, but is distracted again. Despite its austere presence, the hotel really is beautiful. The 2 sets of stairs in the roomy foyer open out like wings to the first floor. The balustrade, carved with beautiful detail, shows cherubs and flowers dancing upwards to an intricate stained glass window. Some of the glass is missing. Still vivid in colour, it depicts the Virgin Mary holding her son. Roz looks at Mary for a moment, but the mother's tender, caring features make her feel something she doesn't want to tackle right now. Roz forces herself to turn away. This is taking too long. Roz strikes on her answer for the hotel's failure. Asakawa's insistence on maintaining the hotel's original features consumed any cash for fundamental modernization. It wasn't affairs, drink, or blackmail that drove him under. It was pride. She doesn't say this out loud. Even she knows this could be an unfair prediction. She predicts it anyway. The next hour, Roz notes they should have been 20 minutes, is spent running through the hotel's clear-out. For someone who was so reluctant to enter earlier, Asakawa sure is laying it on thick now. Roz holds back a sigh. She presses her clipboard to her chest. She hates the way it makes her look, but for a job this big, it's her lifeline. She scribbles notes into 5 columns: storage, charity, sale, waste, and TBC. The TBC column is a last resort, and she avoids it wherever possible. Roz forgets that for most clients, splitting up items this way seems brutal. Asakawa reluctantly divvies out the possessions in the hotel to each column. Every so often, when he can't decide, he offers Roz something, and every time she politely declines. I don't make a habit of taking any client's items, Mr. Asakawa. The decision of what should happen with anything in this hotel must be yours, and yours alone. She has mastered a way to deliver this script with gravitas, enough so that the client believes it has some sort of thoughtful meaning, an advice line to help them through the gloomy process. In truth, she repeats it exactly the way her lawyer told her to. She can't be responsible for anything in that hotel as much as she can be responsible for Asakawa changing his mind. Nor can she be bothered. With the ground floor covered, they approach the stairs. Roz avoids making eye contact with the righteous Mary. A sudden shaft of light through the stained glass casts a halo at Roz's feet. "Clever," whispers Roz. She doesn't look up. She steps over it. As they reach the top, that black ink feeling freezes in Roz's veins again. She pauses and touches one of the big black radiators. It's off. Why wouldn't it be? Asakawa needs to be out of here in a month. Roz makes this the focus. They pass through every bedroom quicker now, despite Asakawa's hesitations. All of them almost the same in decoration and furniture. All are almost pristine, save for dust that has gathered whilst the hotel has been empty. Roz wonders if some of the rooms had any guests. She continues itemizing and cataloguing diligently. Asakawa stops at a final room on the 4th floor. He braces, then rests a quivering hand on the door handle, which only rattles in his fist like an alarm bell. Roz looks at him, this time sympathetic. She mistakes his fear for mawkishness. She rests her steady hand on his shoulder. "This will get easier." Her reassurance seems to have little effect, so she confidently opens the door to this new, mysterious space for him. As a space tucked in the corner at the very end of the corridor, Roz assumed it might be a cleaner's cupboard. It's not. It's a tiny bedroom. Roz steps inside. That sinking feeling, that blackness Roz felt when she arrived, hits her harder than ever. She hugs her clipboard, as if covering her chest with armor. She looks in all corners of the room, trying to find the source of her discomfort. "You can't see a feeling." She stops mid-whisper, aware how stupid the words feel in her mouth. The room is almost empty and in total disrepair. Dark and dusty, even the floor is bare, exposing chipped floorboards and mouse holes. Wallpaper hangs from the walls, as if trying to reveal the hotel's grim history beneath. Tucked in the corner is a tiny child's bed. Brass, chipped and rotten, it has the same curly, intricate frame as the hotel's Victorian staircase. Asakawa looks hesitantly at Roz, her sympathy now evaporated on the cold air, her fear matching Asakawa's. No, she thinks, they're so close to finishing. She turns to him expectantly. He explains, embarrassed, that he's not sure which column this item should go into. "I can assure you there's a column for everything." Roz looks at the bed a moment, oddly anxious and confused. "You mean the bed?" Asakawa whispers a weird and raspy. "Yes." "At least there's no one in it." Asakawa doesn't smile. Roz steps boldly towards it, that creepy feeling making her nauseous now. Still, she waves it away. She has so much to do, and she's not having a spooky bed in a spooky hotel, one of hundreds she's already cleared out, stop her completing this month's accounts. Roz sits on it. It groans miserably under her weight. It's painful for her to sit on, not in the typical way when springs try to puncture your skin or wriggle into your joints. It makes Roz ache with pain. Roz looks to her left. She spies the childlike handwriting on one of the bedposts. A name. Ben. The foot of the N falls away into a crack. Stealing a look at Asakawa, Roz stands up quickly, steps away from it. Fear and repulsion streak across her face for a moment, but she recomposes quickly. It's too late. Asakawa has noticed. For the first time, he looks her in the eye. He saw what she felt. Unwilling to be seen as unprofessional for the first time in her professional life, Roz soldiers on. She pretends to muse over the bed's future, but the decision feels too heavy. She turns away from it. That's easier. She thinks it could be sold, it looks antique, or it could be sent to charity, especially if Asakawa isn't keen on sprucing it up. Or it could be sent to the dump. There are options. Roz realizes she's whispering all this nonsense to herself. She tentatively looks at Asakawa. He hasn't stepped over the threshold. He looks helpless. Finding all the will he can, he opens his mouth. He tells her, "That bed has been in the hotel forever, before it was even a hotel." Roz is puzzled. She turns to look at it again, pushing her pen into her clipboard. She doesn't know what to do. "But I can't take care of it anymore." She can't put her finger on it. It's just a bed, just a tired, battered child's bed. But it feels like deciding the fate of something human. Roz turns back to Asakawa, who offers no other explanation. Now he looks utterly petrified. She cannot bring herself to force his hand, nor can she, or does she want to, make the call herself. Roz writes, "Brass bed." The only thing so far in the TBC column. It's 3 weeks later, and Roz's growing list clouds over her memory of that bleak room and sad little bed. Casually dressed and dustier than her first meeting with Asakawa, Roz carries a side table through the hotel. Workmen dash past, shouting instructions. Months-old dust swirls in the air, only to settle back down where it was. Roz, swallowing a yawn, paces the space with everyone else. It's their final day. It's Rycroft House's final opening, its final closing. Something falls against Rosa's foot, and mid-stride she kicks it a metre ahead. She picks it up. Part of a toy? Possibly a wheel? It's bright red, but with mould and rust coating its rim. If Ros stops, that same frosty, empty feeling presses on her chest. She looks at the walls and ceilings for the source, helplessly. She puts it down to being overworked. Ros looks about her, spots one of the hired waste bins, and casually drops the wheel inside. Ros hands the envelope of cash to the final removal man, Tan. He is barely 20 and has a blithe spirit that hasn't started to irritate Ros yet. He loves the job with a kind of feverish energy, running back and forth, dashing ahead of Ros to pick things up before she can. Ros thinks he may fancy her, but she'd never admit that, even in her thoughts, for fear of wanting to stab her own eyes out in embarrassment. Moving heavy items suits him. He did the work of 3 men today. Tan checks the envelope and smiles gratefully. Predictably, he moves to give Ros a hug, something that's become a bit of a tradition on the last day of each job. Against her normal character, she lets him. Fear suddenly strikes the bottom of her spine. She doesn't want him to leave. She doesn't want to be here alone. With her cheek squashed awkwardly against his ear, she could just whisper now. "Would you mind hanging back? Helping me with the lock-up?" But she doesn't. What would he think? Ros remembers when she thought unfairly that Asakawa was too proud. It's dusk. There's still some light left, but when Tan closes the big wooden door behind him, Ros feels like she's in the bottom of a pit. She spikes her chin into the air, puffing out her chest for whatever lies in wait in the darkness. She's done this before in hundreds of scary, dark spaces. She whispers, "Don't make this a problem, Ros." She takes a hip flask from her back pocket and swigs at the sweet liquor inside. A ritual, something she always does when faced with locking up a particularly creepy venue on a particularly creepy night. She should probably stop. Ros thinks back on the one time she let Tan have a little, and ever since he will occasionally nod at her, put his thumb to his mouth, pinky out, and knock his head back. She only ever smiles back when he's out of sight. The memory helps her press on with the lock-up. "This will be fine." Ros begins pacing the rooms, checking each for anything left behind. They're all empty. The lads did well. She'll never have to come back here again. It's when she sees that small door on the 4th floor at the end of the corridor with a square yellow note on its front that she realizes with growing anguish that the hotel isn't empty. She's forgotten something. The black, inky feeling in her veins returns, making her want to vomit up the fear, let it all out onto that shitty green carpet. She smacks her face, composes, and rips the yellow post-it off the door. Scribbled shakily it reads, "Locked, can't clear today." Roz pushes both hands into the door frame, head hanging. She rages silently to herself. She knows it's locked. This is on her. Does she open it up? Or just leave? Will anyone even notice? Asakawa will. He definitely will. And she can't afford to delay on this invoice. It's just a room. It's just a bed. This is stupid. The door latch pops, then creaks open. Roz is paralyzed. She doesn't move an inch. There's a tapping sound, what she thinks is rain, but then realizes with horror is the patter of little footsteps. They run away from the door quickly. Then there is the squeak of the bed frame as someone jumps in it. Roz stays exactly where she is. 10, maybe 20 minutes pass. She's utterly afraid. Roz's heart slows. She realizes no one is going to move in this standoff unless she does. She shifts a hand towards the door, each creak and knock making her flinch. She can see the bed through the gap in the door now, but can't tell if there's anyone in it. Roz realizes she needs to scare whoever is in there first, make a move. Emboldened, she kicks the door hard, too hard. It swings open, bounces against the wall, and slams shut. Roz rubs the irrational dread from her face and tries the door again, opening it gradually this time. "Hello?" She rolls her eyes at her own squealy voice. There is no one in the bed. She's angry at herself and the time she's wasted. Daring not to look at her watch, Roz pounds over to the bed. She grabs it with both hands. It's much heavier than it looks. Roz drags the bed like a stubborn toddler towards the door, its feet screeching against the floorboards. The sound makes her wince. She gets the bed halfway down the stairs, then stops suddenly, sensing someone at the top, peeking at her through the banisters. She dares not look. Instead, she changes tact. She spies a sledgehammer at the bottom of the stairs. Now, looking over the little bed, the sledgehammer looming above, Roz's ink-black fear is replaced with overwhelming guilt. Her stubbornness wins over, and after the first blow, the bed becomes easier to destroy. Its tiny pieces glint for a moment under the stained glass of the pious Mary, before snuffing out completely. Roz drags the last of the refuse sacks through the heavy oak doors, her lips salty. She wonders if she'd been crying. Barely triumphant, she shakily fumbles the chain and padlock across the heaving great doors, the drabness of the hotel still on her skin. Even in the car, Roz feels stuck in that horrid hotel. It feels like she's stolen a vital section of its foundations, not the tiny bed now rattling in the boot. Roz's shoulders relax when she sees the dump's iron gates shining bright under the moon. They're locked, the dump is shut. Ignoring the tattered warnings and opening times, Roz unlocks the padlock. Regular visits mean she's trusted well enough to have the codes. Violently, Roz reverses her car as far as she can into the filth and garbage. With a final grunt, Roz drags the bed's remains out, angrily lobbing each sack into the towers of rubbish. Dusting her hands, she doesn't look back, barely closing her car door as she speeds away. It's not until she's on the road for 15 minutes does she recompose, stop, and ask herself, what the hell was she doing? Why did she feel like this? Then a feeling she knows all too well returns. Heavy embarrassment. Christ, get it together, Roz. Later that evening, she huddles in bed, running through a multitude of lists, invoices, and memos. We're getting there, she thinks to herself. She stops to look at some photographs of Rycroft House. Lying in bed, alone, the images look creepy now. Her eyes travel nervously to the windows on the 4th floor. She doesn't know what she's looking for. The spaces stay dark and empty. Inexplicably, the sound of the pattering small feet rushes to her ears. They're not nearby. They sound like a memory, but more tangible. Like they exist. A shiver runs through her. She sinks down low, tight under the duvet. Curled in a ball, Roz listens intently, but silence remains. Her sleep is fussy, her muscles spasming in and out of light and deep sleep. She wakes finally to the sound of a child crying in her dream, leaking out into her bedroom. Her eyes snap open, but she doesn't move. Everything is quiet. Roz is frozen. After much coaxing, she lifts herself onto her elbows. The room is too dark. Suddenly, tiny footsteps running from her hallway echo through her space, the little pads tapping against Roz's wood floor. Though she doesn't want to confess it, she recognizes them immediately. The same footsteps she heard in the hotel. Roz can't help it. She draws in a short but audible gasp. The footsteps stop. Roz is on her back. She won't shift. Instead, she moves her gaze to the end of the wooden board at the foot of her bed. For some eerie reason, she knows this is the spot where the footsteps stopped. Another horrible standoff. Roz, yet again, makes the first move. She lifts her head some more, cursing the rustling duvet. Roz's face contorts in horror. She's sure, horribly certain, she can see the top of a child's head. A toddler's. Small, round, with jet black matted hair. It's still. Ross, in turn, is immobile. Suddenly it darts to her left, running the full length of the bed's footboard. The footsteps are louder now. Her eyes can only follow. She braces herself, ready to see the ghost come around the bed's corner towards her. But it doesn't. Nothing. The next day, shattered, Roz finds herself driving towards Rycroft House. Her tyres crack on the drive's gravel, but when she arrives, Roz can only stare at the hotel entrance, its chain and lock still intact. Soon the fear overwhelms her, and she must drive away, on to the next job. This one's finished. That night, Roz reads, all her pillows propping her up, scanning the same paragraph over and over. She blames the late night on all her paperwork. Really, she's terrified to turn out the light. She repeats the words which are slowly becoming her mantra. The job at Rycroft House is done. I never have to see that room on the 4th floor again. The brass bed is at the dump. It's over. Barely convinced, Roz removes 3 of the pillows, plumps them, puts one back, then finally lies down. Even stone-cold fear can't stop a worn-out body from sleeping. Roz dreams fretfully. She's stuck. She looks down at her feet. The green mouldy carpet of Rycroft House covers them, crawling up her shins like moss. She looks up at the stained glass image of Mary. The glass interchanges between its natural colours and odd-shaped eyes, blinking blankly at her. She dares not look at Mary's face. Some force pushes Roz's head, and she reluctantly turns her gaze up to look at the saint. She tries to show repentance. Mary watches her still. Suddenly a pane of glass drops out of the window, out of Mary's face. It smashes into shards, making tiny cuts in the moss and Ross's legs. There is a gaping black hole where the thin line of Mary's gentle mouth should be. Both Mary and Ross scream. The scream escapes loud into her bedroom. It's a child's shrill cry. Ross gasps awake. She stares wide-eyed at her ceiling, trying hard not to react as the footsteps tread the same path at the bottom of her bed. Ross begs them to leave her alone. It works. There's silence. Then a whimper. Then the creepy patter of little feet continues. Roz can't help herself, shooting a look at the foot of her bed. There's the small head again, bobbing along the top of the board. It stops in the same place. Roz waits, stricken with fear. She whispers, the word caught crisp at the back of her throat. Hello. As if on some cruel cue, a thing starts to rise over the footboard. Roz can barely keep the breath in her lungs. Tears form, her eyes stuck open. The thing keeps coming, rising over the board. It's planted softly at her feet. It's a truck, rusty, cracked, with a wheel missing. Just as Roz is ready to move, the toy is snatched away. Silence. Roz doesn't go back to sleep. She never takes her eyes off the bottom of her bed. Everywhere stinks. It's windy and seagulls screech and bomb around Roz as she stumbles across the dump. Kicking through rubbish, frenzied, she looks for the brass bed. The sacks weren't where she left them, and she can't find one of the bed's parts. She slaps her chest, swatting away a sob. She's so tired. Roz stumbles slightly, then drags her soiled boot out of the mess. Irritated, she pulls her hair away from her face, ties it up and focuses on the horizon. It's getting dark, and she can't think of a more pathetic place to get lost. It's not here. The bed's not here. Roz sits bolt upright in bed, willing her eyelids open. Her bedside lamp flickers, withers, dies. How unfair, she thinks. Like a juvenile, Roz pulls her duvet up to her chin. The flat is quiet, but feels vacuous. Inexplicably, the space becomes darker. Roz releases her crunched fingers, drawing in a breath in pain. The child's cry echoes this time. I'm sorry, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find your bed. The little feet patter, and Roz stares open-mouthed as the shadow of the little child's head moves out of the darkness and along the bottom of her bed frame. I'm sorry. It's my job to get rid of things. The bed creaks. A spring pops. She looks to her right at where her headboard should be. She realizes it's been replaced with a familiar-looking brass frame. Springs and sharp coils stab into her lower back. Her skin crawls with the residue of that horrible hotel. Roz chokes. She realizes she is now in the brass bed. There it is again, the little boy's black-haired head, jogging along the top of the footboard, scuttling the other way. The head stops. Roz shuts her eyes gently, almost resigned to her fate. The tears fall, heavy. She opens them. The same crooked truck sits at her feet. The two little headlights and radiator grille look like two eyes and a grinning mouth, mocking her. Defiant, she stares back. It'll be gone soon. Once again, like some torturous dance, the little head bobs along the footboard, disappearing at its edge. Unable to take it any longer, Roz shoots the duvet over her head, shuffling to the bottom and closing the cover in tightly around her. Far removed from the woman who stood tall with her clipboard, Roz makes herself as small as the child tormenting her. I am sorry. A dangerous gap in her duvet exposes the brass bedpost near her head. It's real. Then she sees the name. Ben. Small. Scribbled by something else, small. Roz reckons with herself. I'm sorry. Ben. Her voice is clear. The room is suddenly calm. Her bedside light snaps back on, the warm light falling on Roz's red, tear-stained face. It's quiet. Has she figured out the whole sorry affair? Did all little Ben want was someone to say sorry to him? For taking his bed, for not playing, for his ghostly, lost existence. Roz drags herself up, out from under her bedclothes. She keeps her head down, though. She makes herself lift her chin, surveying the room carefully. All is as it should be. Her clipboard rests on the velvet ottoman. Her shirt, worn that day, lies casually across the floor, her glass of water dutifully waiting on the side table. She's home. Roz lies back down. The sigh from her lips takes with it the last of her tension. Before switching out the light, absent-mindedly she looks at the bedpost. It's brass. The name, Ben, carved deeper than ever into the old post. Roz swallows something cold. A child's cold hand moves over her shoulder from behind, pulling Roz into a nightmare embrace. With a gloomy resignation, Roz closes her eyes to sleep. The child no longer has a bed, so, of course, he must share hers. The Brass Bed by Joyce Pugh. Joyce Pugh is an award-winning British horror and thriller writer based in London. Her co-written and co-produced short film, The Blue Door, was nominated for a BAFTA in 2019. As a result, the feature-length script of The Blue Door was optioned by Steven Spielberg's outfit Amblin. Her second short horror script, She Talks in Her Sleep, was filmed in January of this year and is now in post-production, due for an autumn release. You can find The Blue Door on YouTube, gentle listener. I suggest you search for short horror film The Blue Door. That should do the trick. If you enjoyed The Brass Bed, then I'm quite sure this creepy little film will similarly rub you up the wrong way. The right way. And now, on to Patreon subscriber news. We have been beset upon by a horde of new acolytes. Mariella Cavignac, Pandamime, Anthony Bucci, Donna Martin, Travis Whitmore, and Kevin Williams. Hello. Welcome to the Nocturnal Transmissions family. Don't forget to send me a membership card picture and I'll send you some goodies. If you need a little inspiration, jump on our official Instagram page where you can see some of the membership cards of your fellow subscribers. What? You haven't subscribed to our Instagram page yet? You're missing out on all our lovely little trailers and announcements. I recommend you jump onto Instagram immediately and rectify this inexcusable situation. Well, go on. I'll give you a moment to pull it up. Go ahead. That's it. Open up Instagram. Now, type in @Nocturnal Transmissions. See? There we are. Now press that follow button. Press it for all you're worth, gentle listener. And congratulations. You are now part of our special little clique. All right, moving on. I'm afraid I've buried the lead in our Patreon subscriber news section again, because in addition to our beloved new acolytes, we are thrilled to be welcoming a new cohort into our pantheon of most highly esteemed supporters. It's Wildy. Hello, Wildy. It looks to me like you may have had a couple of false starts trying to sign up on our Patreon, but you've cracked the code, and here you are. Welcome. And with that, perhaps it's time to draw down the curtain on another episode of Nocturnal Transmissions. We do so hope we've managed to provide you an enjoyably wretched listening experience, with the assistance of Joyce Pugh's The Brass Bed. Speaking of assistance, this episode was brought to you with the generous assistance of our Patreon subscribers. A particular thank you goes out to our esteemed cohorts: Crystal Collins, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, Fabled Words, Hisu, Alex Brewis, Daniel Clanton, Philip Abruzese, JB, Tippy Polo, Arnie Frank, Wayne Prince, Joe Stinson, Adam, Ivan, Evan Dooley, Belle of the Ball, Rachel Brown, Sam Bell, Stephen Andrews, Andrea Baxter, Thomas Arvin, Javonte Gaston, Sam Hankins, Alicia Townsend, and Wildy. All non-public domain stories are featured with the permission of the authors. All voices and production are concocted by Kristin Holland. Until next time, as always, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone. Especially yourself. Good night, gentle